Hi, hello Quiltcon 2021. We here in American Quilt Study Group are thrilled to be participating with Quiltcon together this year. And I'm Tara Miller of the Quilt District, and I'm here with the 6 know-it-alls. And that is Barbara Brackman, Merikay Waldvogel, Julie Silber, Lynne Bassett, Debby Cooney, and Alden O'Brien. And now I'll throw it over to Barbara.
Well, I'm going to try and share my screen, and we'll just see how this works.
Lynne Bassett, Debby Cooney, and Alden O'Brien. And now I'll throw it over to Barbara.
Well, I'm going to try and share my screen, and we'll just see what's this loop.
Someone is playing it. And Alden O'Brien. Someone in our group was playing it on their machine or their phone, and so I've muted everyone. And that's okay. Now, Barbara, we see your screen.
All right. Now, Barbara's going to start her slideshow, and things should go just perfectly.
Yes. And I'm going to unmute everyone. If you guys can just turn off anything else you have playing.
Okay. Well, we are so happy to be here. 6 know-it-alls. Julie says I should be saying we 6 know-it-alls. We met at AQSG, and we've been friends for years. And we weekly get together for a little party, and we show quilts, and we crack ourselves up. So we thought maybe you'd like to be
we met at AQSG, and
so something's looping there too. But today we're going to talk about the 7 principles of modernism, because after all, Quiltcon is about modern. And now I am the only person who had to take 4 years of art history. And so
I did too.
And I know quite a bit about. Did you too?
Yep.
Alden did too. Yeah. And I know quite a bit about what the art historians say. So I thought it might be fun to look at quilts through the principles of modernism. A lot of people think modernism is a free-for-all or that it's chaos, but no. Modernism has rules. So we're going to discuss this with my other 5 know-it-alls, and let me tell you a little bit about them. Julie Silber and Merikay are collectors, and so is Debby Cooney, but they're also quilt historians. Merikay wrote the Quilts of Tennessee. Debby Cooney wrote
Silber.
What? So Merikay wrote the Quilts of Tennessee, and Debby Cooney wrote the Maryland Quilt Book. I wrote the Kansas Quilt Book. So we're quilt historians, and we write quite a bit about quilts. Alden O'Brien and Lynne Bassett are museum curators, and they are experts in costume. And we're not going to deal with costume in this lecture, but it really would be fun to talk about modernism and how it affected people's dress. But we're going to talk mainly about quilts, but we're going to focus on these principles. So I'll show you lots of paintings too. So there's many problems with talking about modernism. One thing is it's totally ambiguous. There's contradiction in the term. It means right now, and yet to an art historian, it means an artistic movement that originated about 1880. That's quite a while ago. And as Virginia Woolf said, and she was a modernist writer, she certainly changed the way prose was presented. But she said on or around December 10th, human character changed. And by that, she meant modern. Things had gotten modern. So we can look back at least 110 years. And people who were writing the rules tended to be Europeans. They were Europeans at first. And many of them were Germans. And they taught at a school called the Bauhaus. And one of the rules that the Bauhaus loved was what we call minimalism. You might notice when they spell Bauhaus, which has got 2 A's in it, they thought there were some unnecessary parts to the letter A, so they threw them out. Minimalism means taking everything out but what you consider the bare necessities. And the Bauhaus felt that there were only 3 bare necessities in shape: squares, circles, and triangles. Now I have that woman up there. I found her. And she is so Bauhaus, so modern. She's wearing a lace collar, made up of applique, and she's got nothing but circles and triangles. And then her hat's a circle too. So she's she's obviously bought into the whole Bauhaus idea of minimal. And the man who was behind all this was a lovely person, as you can see by his portrait, Adolf Loos. He was German. He wrote a book called Ornament and Crime, which was published in English in 1913. For him, he is the guy behind the idea that every building should be a cube, as you can see by his tombstone. And that is sort of what we had until, 20, 30 years ago. Ornament was a crime. You weren't going to put any kind of column, any kind of fufo on the front of a building. It was a cube, and maybe you're allowed to use a circle or some kind of a cone with it. So we're going to talk about quilts and how they appeal to modernists. They appeal to all of the six of us because we all have this basis in minimalism. And so Julie Silber's up with the first quilt. So tell us about this quilt.
Of the six of us.
So Julie.
We're having a little bit of trouble with Julie's sound.
So you want to come back?
Yeah, maybe. Julie, if you could, you have some kind of replay happening. If you have any YouTube or anything like that open, playing it, if you could close that and then wave at me and I'll let you back in.
Well, let's start with Debbie then. Debby Cooney.
Okay.
This is your turn to get this gorgeous quilt.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, good. All right. This graphic Streaks of Lightning quilt was made by Alice Susan Lesher, who stitched her initials and the date 1878 in the corner, which you can see in this big slide, but it's fairly large. She was born in 1864, and she was only 14 when she finished it. 2 years later, she was listed as a dressmaker in the 1880 census. So she probably had the skills at that point to make the quilt by herself. Alice lived in Greencastle, Pennsylvania, a town south of Chambersburg, the seat of Franklin County near the border with Maryland. This is an area thickly populated with German settlers in the 18th and 19th centuries. And among them were many members of Anabaptist religious groups, such as Mennonites and Old Order River Brethren. The many Lesher families were part of these so-called plain people who dressed and lived modestly by religious decree. Many of the quilts made by members of these plain congregations were done in large-scale, bold patterns and often in bright, solid colors. Unlike the Amish, the Mennonites and Brethrens used printed fabrics for their clothes and quilts. At the sale of the Lesher family quilts, which numbered over 30 pieces, were several Irish chain quilts that Alice had constructed and quilted in the early 1900s in busy prints of screaming yellows, oranges, and greens that most of us would find very hard to live with. Like Alice, several other plain family quilt makers in the same area produce quilts in large-scale solids and small-scale patterns and fabrics. Alice's Streaks of Lightning is simplicity itself, alternating cotton rectangles of golden yellow and oxblood red to create diagonal light moving from sky to earth. The three strip borders are wide enough to contain the center field. And the streaks are nicely quilted in double rods and clamshells, and the border in fans. So,
is it modern?
I think so.
Yeah. It's certainly minimal.
Yeah.
I mean, I said squares, but rectangles count too.
Good.
Now the question here is, we have a plain woman in 1878 anticipating modernism, and that's the question. Is it a coincidence? I mean, certainly Bauhaus knew nothing about the Pennsylvania German plain people, but it must be just a parallel, and it might be the limitations of the fabric that was available and what she was permitted to do with it. But they certainly anticipate modernism, and it's a real conundrum.
Yeah.
What do you guys think?
Oh yeah, I think it's got those. I mean, it's got that principle of modernism of the minimalism for sure. She's just put together a bunch of squares or rectangles to get that effect.
I think it's all about the color, and I can't help but think that, you know, some of these artists must have had some quilts in their family that they were looking at when they came up with some of their ideas.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good
And
point.
this pattern is very 1870, very post Civil War. You know, you don't see a lot of quilts in this pattern before. Some, but not a lot. So that was probably something that was being handed around in her community.
I don't know if it's just my glasses or my screen or what, but it has a movement to it that I think of, you know, for some reason it reminds me of an Arthur Dove painting that kind of has a bit of a movement.
A glow, sort of a glow.
Yeah.
It's visual because yellow, I guess, you know, yellow's complement is purple. And whenever you put complements together, the eye has a hard time looking at them. And so her red there is purple enough that that's probably what causes that to shimmer.
There is some sort of glaze on these fabrics. I don't know what it is because they're just cotton and they're not.
Really?
They're not chintz, but they do have some sort of finish. So I expected that there were fine. You know, they're fine fabrics. They're not just something that just is lying around. She had to have these fabrics to make this, and she was only 14.
Yeah.
It's interesting because there were many other quilts of hers in the sale, and they are just the very patterns that you would think you would ordinarily find up there. There were Irish chains and other log cabins and a few stars, but they were all in just wild printed colors that really didn't go together. Talk about modern. If nobody modern would like them because they're just
Too busy.
They're too busy. They're too clashing. But this early one, for some reason, is very minimal and very well done, and without a lot of surface busyness. So I can't imagine what explains that.
Well, and what she's done too, I'm just realizing it's, we talked about the minimalism of the color. She's got the complementary colors. It's the same as a red and green quilt in that she's got one primary color, the yellow, and then the only other color is the purple, which is a combination of the other two primary colors, red and blue. So she's got red, blue, and yellow divided into two colors, one the primary and one the secondary. It's the same thing as the red and green. So it's pleasing to even though we don't use purple and yellow together as much as we use red and green, it's the same visual effect, essentially, in using the color wheel in that way.
And so what's so amazing is her sophistication at 14. And she might have just been one of those people who had a really good eye, and she liked what she saw. And then, speaking of good eyes, Debbie is a collector. So she went through all those 30 quilts and picked this one out as the one she bought.
She knew the one to pick.
Yeah, let's look at another one of hers. This is interesting. Red and green.
Yeah, that's definitely. This cotton crib quilt from central Pennsylvania was made by an unknown quilt maker, probably in the 1850s. She used a small figured turkey red print to position large half-square triangles into a jagged pattern against a two-step green print background. The 4 red rows move up and down like a saw, cutting the vertical space one way and then the other. The dominant saw teeth leave the recessive green to form 2 columns and a very jagged streak of lightning in the center. The border is a Greek key inspired by ancient classical designs used for centuries to decorate architectural exteriors and interiors and works of art. The orderly progression of the yellow keys presents a good contrast to the spiking red triangles piercing the center. The 6-strand cables quilted into the negative spaces provide the only curves in this otherwise geometric piece.
Mhm. That's interesting.
There's
The
a
Greek
couple
key is the
quilts
least modern.
there's a couple quilts this year in the Quiltcon that are very much like this.
Really?
And they call them everlasting.
Tree everlasting.
Tree everlasting. Tree everlasting. Yeah.
Yeah. And there was one in the Whitney show in 1971 that Jonathan Holstein showed this morning in a picture too. And it's orange and black. Really. This is a classic design that it's just using a triangle, a simple triangle and a square.
And so it's minimal. Minimalism.
There it's minimal.
I think it's interesting to point out that the border is retro. The border is Pompeian. You know, once they uncovered Pompeii, that became incredibly important in the classical imagery. And so, you know, one of the principles of modernism is no revivals. No revivals, of course, unless you're reviving modernism. And so it's an interesting contrast there, but it's still so geometric, it works great.
I think
So we'll go back up to Julie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I can
Oh,
do
good.
it.
Oh, there you are. We can hear you. Let's go up to this one first. Where'd you get this Amish quilt?
Well, this is a quilt from the Esprit Quilt collection, of which I was curator for many years. I'm going to interrupt Barbara and ask you if you can hide what's at the bottom.
Oh, hi. Thank you. That's smart.
There we go.
What's your name?
It's a diamond made by one of the Amish women in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, where it was about 1930.
Wow.
Now, in thinking about that and what mainstream women were generally making in 1930, what were the most popular patterns? Grandmother's flower garden, double wedding ring, Dresden plate, lots of pieces, lots of print. And this is what the Amish were doing, perhaps with a nod to early quilts, American quilts, which are often central medallion, having the design in the middle and multiple borders. And it doesn't get much more minimal than this, although the Amish themselves sometimes did a design called open square or center square, where it would be take away the diamond, fill in the center to be all rusty red. So
Yes, eliminate
the
the
square.
Eliminate the pink triangles. That's pretty minimal. Square and a square. Joseph Albers.
Square and square. Right. So the Amish made these quilts with large fields of jewel-like tones in a variety. They had several favorite designs, and a center square, the one I described, is one. Diamond in the square is the most common. Bars, trip around the world, and 9-patch are the 5 designs that we typically see, and everybody made them. It was a tradition. There's lots and lots and lots of diamonds in various colors and slightly different proportions, made in the classic period of Amish quilts, which is about 1880 to about 1950. And after 1950, we begin to see the Amish making quilts for the outside. And there being so this quilt was made in 1930-ish and was made by the Amish for the Amish with their own aesthetic and not trying to please anybody outside the community. There's, as you can see, 0 ornamentation in the color and the line, except for the quilting. It's a little bit difficult to see here, but the Amish women in Lancaster County were masterful or mistressful, expert hand quilters, and they did elaborate designs, but they chose to use non-contrasting thread.
That's a good
So
point.
what you get is quite a bit of ornamentation, but it's reticent. It's kind of embossed. And we speculate, we don't know for sure, but we speculate that the reason that they used non-contrasting colored thread was, think about if these elaborate quilting designs, which I'm sorry you can't see very well, but there's flowing feathers in the border, the wide border, and it's pretty elaborate. And as I said, masterfully done. But if you used a white thread, it would just scream this beautiful quilting. Can you go back?
No, I just that was accidental.
And since humility is a cornerstone of Amish life, what we surmise, and we may be wrong, is that by hiding the quilting, except if you're right upon it, you're bowing to the humility factor and avoiding pride, which is for the Amish a sin. You know, this aesthetic goes through all of Amish life. I mean, if you look at their farms and how they're laid out, and you look at their architecture, it's not ornamented, it's simple, it's practical, and minimal. I do want to speak to what you said, Barbara, and get back to one thing. This is Lancaster County, Pennsylvania in 1930-ish. The color field painters, the painters in Greenwich Village, who are sometimes whose paintings are sometimes compared to these, they in 1930 or 40 or 50 were able to and did travel to Lancaster County. It was a beautiful place for them to go. There are clotheslines. They could easily have seen this kind of thing as they drove through the countryside. And we know that there were some of those artists who had places in Pennsylvania. And who was it who said, I think Lynne maybe, who said these artists sometimes might have had quilts in their families that influenced them? Well, I think that it's entirely possible that the painters in New York were seeing this kind of thing. My friend Pat Ferrero told me that she once read somewhere and didn't take note of where that the chapel, that Mark Rothko had an Amish, Lancaster County Amish quilt.
Wow.
I've never heard it anywhere else, and it may be, it may not be so. But I think it's important to note that the Amish were not driving their buggies to Greenwich Village, but the Greenwich Village artists and other New York artists could easily have gone to Lancaster. Anybody?
Well, once us artists saw these quilts in the 70s, when in the Holstein and Gail Vanderhoof's show at the Whitney, it just knocked us out and changed what we were doing, I think, in many ways.
Yeah.
But that's sort of post 1940, there's some linking. There is definitely some linking. More than just maybe coincidence. Well, I'm going to go to your next one because this one's pretty spectacular too.
Well, I got this quilt with no info. I bought it because I think it's just wonderful.
Yes.
And it would have been wonderful if it was all the same colors. But the fact that she changed it in the middle like that, and I have nicknames for my quilts, and this one I just call arrows. But how is it constructed, you guys? I once knew this. I think it's a rail fence of pink, red, and pink, and then a rectangle with a triangle in it.
Uh-huh.
Is that the construction of this?
It sort of alternates rectangle, triangle, rectangle, triangle.
Yeah.
And then she ran out of fabric.
Yeah.
Or did she do that on purpose? Because that makes all the difference in the quilt, to have that darker pink on the right and the little block of the lighter pink scattered elsewhere. I mean, that totally makes that quilt.
Yeah.
And what year do you think it was made?
it's turn of the century. It's about 1900, might be 10 years either way. That's a what we call a watermelon pink, or two shades of that
Double pink.
double pink. And
Again, it's primary colors. You know, minimalism also meant a limited amount of color. You were sort of stuck with the three primaries, and this does it: red, yellow, and blue.
yeah. So it might be interesting to just talk for a moment about what was intentional and what was not, which is something we actually cannot know unless we get talk to the quilt maker or have something that she wrote about it. And who knows whether this was intentional or, I mean, it was certainly intentional, but whether she actually ran out of fabric or, as Lynne suggests, made a conscious artistic decision to organize it in this way is something we'll never know. But,
Well, she has to have known that if she was making a full-size quilt, looking at her darker or the medium pink, she has to have known that wasn't enough for the whole quilt. So, you know, whether she started out saying, I'm going to make a quilt with 3 large bands of color, or whether she said, I want to make a pink quilt. Oh, well, I guess I've got 2 different shades of pink, so I'll put darker on the top and bottom and lighter in the middle. She knew going into this project what she had.
Are you quilt makers agreeing with that? I mean, don't you sometimes get to you guess
I think
what?
we run out of fabric all the time.
Yeah.
Sure. But there's no way that she could have looked at her stash or looked at that amount of the darker pink and said, oh, sure, now I have enough to be the background.
There's that. But
so she knew going into it that she needed two different shades of pink.
Yeah, but then the question that Lynne raises is on the right, where she those arrows pointing to the right in the center, using the dark. And then below the center section, she's got several pieces of the lighter pink.
Yeah.
That could have gone into the center section on the right.
Right.
True.
Could have gotten closer.
Right.
To symmetrical. So why?
Yeah.
I don't know why, but I'm glad you did. It's fabulous. I love it.
It is great.
Yeah.
It would be boring without that.
Yeah.
Well, it really might.
This is a quilt that I bought for my own personal collection and not for my inventory. I find myself drawn to the odd and unusual, thus you friends. But yeah, this is, I mean, I do sew quilts of this style, but this one really, really, really caught me.
Well, we're going to move on. You know, we're talking quite a bit here. I think we can just sort of summarize it here. Modernism is minimalism. And as we said, the center diamond Amish might be the best example. The other thing is, even if you have the same shapes, you don't want to junk it up. As an art teacher, I used to say, don't junk it up, don't junk it up. And the one on the left, much as I love it, they junked it up. Mm-hmm. So let's see if we can go. What do you think, Kara? Should we go on or have a break?
I think we should keep going for a few minutes.
All right, let's do. Okay, well, the second principle we want to talk about is asymmetry. And this is something very important in architecture, as you can see now. Thomas Jefferson in 1809 built a building that was beautifully symmetrical. You knew where to focus your eye. Frank Lloyd Wright, 120 years later, was totally interested in asymmetry. Where do you focus your eye on falling water? It's the whole idea of changing your viewpoint is very much a part of modernism. And so Lynne sent this one from the Wadsworth Athenaeum. Is it modern or not? Well, it is just a simple diamond shape, but the thing is it becomes static. And when you start adding asymmetry to something like one that Tara owns over there, the Crazy Quilt, it becomes more modern. It's just more to focus on. So let's look at some asymmetrical quilts then. And Alden has 2 log cabins from the great DAR Museum collection. Alden, what do you know about these two?
Well, sadly, this is somewhat unusual for the DAR. At the DAR, because so many of our quilts were donated by family members, DAR members, who knew or at least suspected who the quilts had come from, or at least could say this is from the line of the family that was from such and such an area. These two are unusual in that we have no idea who made them. So unfortunately, I can't give you any of the provenance there. Because they are log cabins, we can tell you they're from, approximately 1880 to 1900-ish. And the one on the left is all made in silks, including quite a few satins, mostly solids, but not all. And the one on the right is all cottons and wools. So you get a very different effect with the very shiny one on the left and the matte one on the right. I'll talk about the one on the right first, because this really is the one that is asymmetrical. Obviously, you do have symmetry on the left, and I think the left actually speaks to some other principles of modernism. But I love the one on the right that, so often when you have log cabins, you have these radiating squares, or you have the zigzags, you have these very regulated square blocks with the light and dark halves of them arranged in ways to create really interesting optical effects and mostly symmetrical ones. But on the right, we've got a completely different and very modern, as we're defining it, very different effect where all of these, you can't even say, oh my gosh, yeah, on the left, you've got a whole lot of things that are purple and yellow, and they're all arranged in a diamond. But here you can't even find, wait a minute, one of these squares, a few of these squares are pale gray and navy, but not very many, and some are navy and red, but not very many, and some are something else. There's so many different combinations. Some of them are both dark. Some of them seem to be maybe even both light. It's hard to even tell. And they're arranged in these ways to create these large, mostly sort of buff colored and a few red diamonds, arranged in a very asymmetrical way with all these other things all over the place. It's just wonderful. There's no, she must have planned it in some way. She had to lay it out anyway. But it's completely asymmetrical. You can't find a pattern or a repeat really of what's going on anywhere. And I just, it gives it a very, it reminds me of Cubism in a way, or one of those sort of jazz improvisation kind of things. It's just got this wonderful, unpredictable, asymmetrical quality to it that I really think is quite a lot of fun and more interesting than the average. And then on the left, you've got, sort of this effect, using the effect of color. And again, if you look carefully, you've got some squares that are, again, yellow and purple, using the primary and then the opposite complementary colors. And then you've got some that are red and green, and some that are paler versions. And then they're all arranged in this sort of, effect that radiates out from the center. And it reminds me more of op art. It's almost a Vasarely kind of thing, of who used all those squares in arrangements of colors that would, almost sort of radiate and pulse in front of your eyes. So, loosely based on op art, because it isn't an illusion, and it doesn't make you go, oh my God, I can't figure, it's making me dizzy. I can't really get the perspective. It's not really distorting anything, but it evokes that kind of op art effect with its playing with the radiating bands of color in opposite complementary pairs of colors. So does anyone else want to weigh in on that after my little speech?
Well, I think you nailed it with the comparison to jazz for the one on the right. And that was a subject that painters also went for in this period. I personally am trying to understand the difference between modern and not modern when we're talking about optics and optical illusion and op art and all that sort of thing, because that tumbling blocks quilt, while I intellectually understand why it's not modern, it's
In a way, it
a
is.
practical thing
Yeah.
to work as well. So help.
Bigger, bigger.
There are many
pieces.
principles. Some of them are contradictory
And not everything has
And
to be
arguable.
all of the above, right?
and arguable.
Yeah.
But you can't include everything.
Right.
And so what's great about the pair here, the log cabins, is the one on the left is symmetrical, but yet it's modern. And that's because what dominates there is
Color.
the minimalism of the square. And it's a lot like those Amish center diamonds.
And we'll come to another principle that Barbara will get to later about the flat use of color.
Yeah. That's
And in a way, this isn't even flat because with the shading, it creates these sort of, receding and some of it seems to come out at you and some of it recedes from the surface kind of effect, which is why I think it goes into the op art category. But I think even though it's not asymmetrical, it's sort of here to contrast with the asymmetrical one, to talk about the different modern effects you can get from a log cabin, I think, really.
Right.
But can you give us the dates on these, or did you?
Oh, if it's, they're both going to be from, last couple of decades of the 19th century, 1880 to 1900-ish.
Yeah, you did say that. Thanks.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The reason I really like this one on the right is that when you first look at it, you think, oh, in a second, you think to yourself, oh, she made a mistake somewhere. Let me see if I can rearrange those pieces in my head. Because I could, perhaps if this went this way and that went that way, it would all merge into something
into place.
like this one on the left. But very quickly, you think that it doesn't, that it's deliberate, that she has not put in all the pieces that you would need to make a perfect pattern. So it's deliberately done to make your eye just travel all over the place and various places in it. So it's wonderful.
The terms that come to my mind are fractured and syncopated.
Mm-hmm.
Syncopated, These musical terms of syncopated and jazz, jazz improvisation, these musical terms really do leap to your mind when you look at the one on the right, don't they?
Yeah. And we're not poets. We're not poet historians, but that was what they're trying to do with poetry too. And that's what Virginia Woolf and many of the prose writers were trying to do. So let's go on to the next one, which is Lynne's. And we talk about asymmetry here too. What do you know about these two?
Okay, well, I was thinking of these more as color field, but for they're symmetrical, that's for sure. The pieced wool quilt is from the early 19th century. The quilt on the right from Historic Deerfield is from the late 18th century. So this is obviously going way, way back. And I am a particular fan of these pieced wool quilts from, the late 18th, early 19th century, which seem to come mostly out of New England. Unfortunately, so many of them don't have a history anymore, but the ones that do seem to all come out of New England. This one's from Connecticut, and I love her color choices here. It's a really, really dark. It's a very, very dark brown. It's not black like it looks there. It's a very dark brown. And then the shades of the golden worsted with contrasted with the red. She's almost symmetrical, but not quite. The drops on the right are almost symmetrical. If she had just moved that one red triangle down, they would be. So I don't think she was thinking about that as much as she was about the color and the contrast in that one. The interesting thing about these quilts, including the whole cloth quilt on the right too, is that they're made out of these calendared worsteds, which mean that you have a shiny surface that's produced with heat and pressure and an application of starch. And so that picks up the quilting pattern, and it's that play of light across the surface that brings out the quilting pattern. The quilting stitches typically do not contrast with the fabric. So I was thinking about that when Julie was talking about the Amish quilt. You don't see that in these quilts either. It might be just, the general practice with these large sort of color field sort of quilts. So I wasn't prepared to talk about these in terms of asymmetry. I'm sorry. Somebody
What were
want
you
to
gonna talk
help me out
More
here?
rest. Yeah.
What's that?
Oh, I think it's fabulous. Let's look at this one. This one is more asymmetrical than our first opinion. The only thing that's symmetrical is these two center diamonds. This is asymmetrical, and the way these reds and yellows are. Now, I know the woman who made this put it on a bed, and these were the drops. You never ran from side to side and went, wait a minute, those triangles don't work. But when you hang it on the wall, it appeals to us visually because it isn't static, and because the shape is just great too. It's asymmetrical in its physical shape as well as in the color placement. I put this up there because you asked me why this one wasn't modern, and I said, "Oh, that's not modern." And I think after thinking about it, I realized that you probably were right. It has some modernism, and I'll go down because painters. If you look at one of the things about that calendared wool that you talk about is there's always this stripe because that's what didn't get in the machine. And so look at Barnett Woodman. Yeah, I mean, color field painters. Now, the most extreme, of course, is Ad Reinhardt, who painted nothing but black paintings for years and got away with it. That's when I was in art school.
People paid good money for it.
And made a lot of money on it. But so did his dealer. So this is maybe as minimal as it gets on the overall. I mean, if I had a big minimal apartment in New York City with white walls, this would look fabulous on the wall. It would be the Ad Reinhardt for a little bit less. So
at the Vermont Quilt Festival, gosh, probably 20 years ago, I collaborated with a group of curators to do an exhibition of these pieced wool quilts and the whole cloth quilts. Mm-hmm. And I have to say that was one of the most spectacularly beautiful quilt exhibitions I've ever seen. When you get these up on the wall, they just
of things going on there. Well, we're going to go down. How are we doing on time?
Might be time for a break. We've done two principles.
Yeah. Why don't we go ahead and take a quick break? And
and here's our summary.
Perfect.
Well, do you want to chat about
my share then?
So the quilt on the left is one I just want to refer back to the Amish diamond. These were made about the same time. The Amish diamond and this Dresden plate were made about the same time. This one by mainstream American women, and the Amish and the diamond by Amish women.
Interesting. Okay.
I want to end my show.
All right.
So we'll be back. Is that right?
Yes, we will be back in a few minutes, and I will just run a little slideshow that talks about these amazing women while everyone takes a break and grabs a snack and
or lunch.
Yeah.
We're all members of the American Quilt Study Group, and we invite you all to look into it. It's a wonderful, wonderful organization if you love quilts.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, we'll see you back here in just a few minutes, everybody.
Okay.
You ladies about ready to get back into things?
I sure wish I knew what the next. I'm sorry, I can't.
Mary Kay.
Yeah,
You're
what's
next.
your next?
You're next. That's here. You can't see that, but we're
What
going
are they? I can't find
We're still live. We're still live.
to. Now, don't yell at me, Mary Kay. We're gonna talk about
That's okay.
we're like sisters, frankly, for all the good and bad. We're going to talk about your TVA quilt, and we're going to
What
talk
happened? No, that's in part 3.
about Mary Kay.
Barbara, oh, that's
Ready
okay.
to talk about your TVA quilt and the woman at the spinning wheel. I can skip them.
No, I can. I'm ready. I've got it.
Okay, yeah.
I'm ready.
All right.
My teeth.
I'm politer to people who are not my foes.
Excuse me.
Mary Kay has many secrets, so she knows how it goes.
It still says live in the corner. Are we live or aren't we?
We are still live. We are
hi,
everybody live.
Stop chewing.
Yes, we're going to be live throughout this entire process.
Oh, drat.
So,
Hmm.
Barbara, I'm sharing your screen. Are you ready for
All right,
that?
so I will start my slideshow.
All right, cool.
But I have to go way down. Apparently, it's going to start at the beginning. We've been through those. Don't throw up from dizziness. Oh, there was break. All right.
There's the break.
Are we ready to start, you guys?
Yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
go for it.
The teacher will say the next principle is abstraction. And we have a photo of lilies up there. And then I get to talk about my sister Jane, who's a fabulous watercolorist. And why she is because she knows how to take out what's unimportant and leave in the important stuff in her watercolors. It's not easy to do. I'm a watercolorist too, and I'm nowhere as skilled as she is at abstraction. And here, speaking of abstraction, here's the lily, perfectly abstract, and it goes back to 1840s. We're all familiar with the North Carolina lily, as we call it. And it is just amazing how it captures the essence of that lily. So we have quilt on the left that's very modern in its abstraction. And then a Baltimore album quilt from the New York project over there that is not the least bit modern because they can't leave anything out. And of course, you have to leave things out. You know, any art has to leave things out. But I especially like the fruit bowls, which are such an important part of Baltimore album quilts, in which if there were room, they'd put something else in there. There's no cantaloupe. So we're going to have Mary Kay talk about abstraction because she has studied these very artistic quilts from the 1930s. So you want to tell us about the TVA quilt?
Okay, well, these quilts were made in about 1934 at a TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority electric. It was a flood control and electric dam generation project, FDR project. And this one, it's on the Tennessee River, which goes down into northern Alabama from Tennessee. So these were actually made in northern Alabama. They're called the TVA quilt. And the designer was an art-trained woman by the name of Ruth Clement Bond. Her husband was working for the TVA. They were African-American people working with African-American construction workers and their families who were living there in the dam village in northern Alabama. And she saw the women with free time and in their houses that were built on the village, making quilts like double wedding rings and things like that. And she thought there might be something better, maybe something that would convey more of what they were going through at the time. You can imagine. She was kind of the know-it-all in the 1930s. But anyway, she took a big piece of brown paper and drew out this design. And when you basically what it is an African-American man in the center having to choose between the job offer, that's the white hand. This one woman called it Uncle Sam's helping hand. I'm not sure Ruth Bond called it that, but anyway, it's a white hand coming in, offering this African-American worker a new lease on life, a future. And he was having to choose between, as Ruth was saying, his life of frivolity represented by that musical instrument, and this woman whose shape is here on the right of the image. And there's a lot of symbolism going on in here, but I think is interesting is the abstraction when you think of this as a modern piece of art. Because, I mean, even when I talked to Ruth Bond about her making this quilt, her husband was there too, and he said, people at the time were trying to create images that were not stereotypical of African-American faces in particular. And Aaron Douglas, I think a lot of people, when they look at this, think of him. He was a Harlem Renaissance painter, and he was actually working in Tennessee at the time. And although Ruth said she did not copy anything of his directly, it was definitely in the air. But anyway, she designed it, and then she made it on brown paper, and the women bought fabric. Notice that they're not print fabrics. And again, let's remember that this was made at the same time as that Amish quilt that Julie showed earlier. And probably lots of women were making those Dresden plates at the same time. So Ruth was really ahead of her time. Now remember, she was not the quilt maker. So we know at least 5 women completed the quilts, and their quilts are either in museums or in private collections now. There were 5
different women. 5 different women, 5 different quilts, right?
5 different women, 5 different quilts, but the same image. And the best one was made by Grace Tyler, and hers is not faded at all. And it was chosen one of the top 100 quilts of the 20th century.
Wow.
Notice the quilting on this too, I think is very simple cross-hatching, just over the whole image. What you're looking at is the center panel, and there were big wide borders on the 4 sides of all 5 quilts. This one is actually in the collection, the corporate collection of the Tennessee Valley Authority in Knoxville, Tennessee. And it's framed I'm sorry they did this, but they wanted to show just the center panel.
What's the size, Mary Kay?
This is a bed size. This would cover the top of a bed. So this is a bed-sized quilt with big wide borders that would go underneath it. So this is, I'd say that's 40 inches by 60 inches that you're looking at right now, maybe bigger than that. It's quite large. Really looks like the size of a mural, that an image on a mural you would see.
Now I'm going to jump in and say, I mean, I love this quilt and it's fantastic, but I'm just going to throw this in here to watch the pebble ripples from it. Just to be difficult, one of the principles that we'll get to later is not having a narrative or a story. And this does kind of have a story, or at least it's an allegory, it's got symbolism. So, maybe we can acknowledge that not every modern quilt or painting will follow all 7 of these principles.
Yes,
so there can be some contradictory stuff, and it can still be modern even if it doesn't tick every single box.
That's a good point, and it's contradictory. And you can't follow all of them, but you pick some. But I want to talk about abstraction here. Abstraction is taking out what's unnecessary. And being an artist who has to do that, you it's not easy. You did there. I think that Ruth went too far because most of you don't know what Mary Kay was talking about when she was talking about the woman. There's a woman's face. There's
I've seen this quilt how many times, and I only just now saw that face for the first time. I always thought
and there's her skirt.
I still don't see a face.
See, it's very abstract.
That's a face.
Okay, look at that.
She's looking down.
That's her chest, and this is her
Okay.
skirt. And I think she's grabbing him there with her hand.
Oh, okay. Okay.
She's
I
trying
don't
to.
see the white hand. I have
It's
Oh,
over
the
here.
white hand, unfortunately, is right here, but it's not
it sort
very.
of blends in. Okay.
If this might have faded. Oops!
I see.
Every time I click, I get it. This might have faded in the background.
Okay.
But it's a wonderful thing to see. And in the man, she's eliminated his feet,
The better.
but they're not necessary. And his hand is so great. And then I love that all this minimalism. And then she's put on the little key.
Mhm.
So
That's a fiddle.
fiddle, yeah, or
It's a guitar. It's a
Oh,
guitar.
guitar. Okay.
or a little tiny guitar. But it does illustrate the problems in abstraction. Is you take out what's unimportant, but sometimes you take out too much.
Can you see what I'm showing?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the original big one.
No, we can't see it.
Can't see it?
You're so small and you're behind the live.
I think that the speakers
That's
can
all right.
see it. I can't see it. Okay, we're going to go to the next one, which is also Mary Kay. Mary Kay suggested this one, which was very fashionable in the 30s again. This idea of abstracting using a time-honored needlework tradition, which is to grid things out into squares, cross-stitch. So let's talk about this one. Why did you bring this one up? Why did you send us this?
I guess I was thinking about a kind of a type of quilt that is showing up at modern quilt shows right now, where they digitize. In fact, there's one in the 2021 where the woman has digitized her face,
Yes.
and in lots of different, it's different than that. She has lots of different colors, lots of different shading, whereas I thought this one, Lady at the Spinning Wheel, made by Emma Andrus, she lived in Arizona, is abstracting in a way. In a way, it's negative space. I think it's an interesting kind of modern take on what do we call this? You think about the quilts that Charles Pratt did.
Mm-hmm.
And they are so realistic. I mean,
And they're gridded too, like this.
Yeah, and many colors. And this woman just did 2 colors, red and white. And there's also one that was in the Whitney that I saw that Jonathan Holstein just talked about in his talk this morning with Mary Fons. Mm-hmm. And he talks about think about how just 2 or 3 areas together, like putting blocks together, that he's created a cloud, a suggestion of a cloud. And he talked about, like, look at that little cat in the bottom left. I mean, I don't know. It's pretty clever. I don't know a lot about this, where she got this design. I don't think anybody does.
Well, I can suggest something that it looks like to me, which is that she took one of those old Wallace Nutting prints.
Yes.
Yeah.
And just decided, well, I like the center part of this. I'm going to drop out the rest, and I'm going to do it in this red and white checkerboard. And it's just a perfect goof on the overly sentimental and busy Wallace Nutting prints that were everywhere.
It's classic colonial revival, but brought down to the essence.
And it's also the period that had a lot of interest in the revival of silhouette portraits.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's right.
So
and also cross stitch. You had lots and lots of cross stitch kits at this time, many of which, because they were reviving an oldie timey quote unquote colonial pastime, and I say quote unquote because of course it extended far beyond the colonial period. They were doing colonial scenes and motifs, and there is nothing more iconically colonial revival than the woman at the spinning wheel.
Yeah. And the woman in the ladder back chair.
Yes,
My favorite
And the
part
mob
of
hat.
this is the
The
skirt.
mob hat.
and the mob
Oh, the
cap.
mob
Yep.
hat.
Mob
My
hat.
favorite part is the skirt with the 9 patches. That's just clever.
Now, isn't there a second one of these? I saw Joanna Rose had one in,
Did she?
yes, exactly the same.
Oh.
In their red and white show. What was it called?
Oh, yeah.
You know, what's happened,
Infinite
Julie,
variety.
is that this was published in 1993 in our books,
Oh.
Barbara, in my book. I bet, I'm not positive, but some people have already copied these things in the
Gotcha.
last 20 some.
This is not going to happen with me.
No,
You know, trying to get those squares straight. Oh man, but it's wonderful. Now Mary Kay has become quite an expert on Ann Orr, who did the same thing.
I'm
So-
not, but see, these are so commercial and, well, anyway, the Ann Orr, the one in the upper left is not Ann Orr.
Oh, I knew you were going to tell me that because
I
I
know.
always get it wrong.
But the one on the right is.
Okay, that is
That is
that's the one.
definitely, but Ann Orr was known for the cross-stitch needlepoint kind of chart designs, and it was definitely colonial revival. But again,
Can I?
But sentimental and sort of.
That's what I was
pretty.
going to say.
Sorry.
If
Go
nothing else, Lynn has learned what sentiment means.
Well, you know,
It
that's
is sentimental.
such an important part of what the modernism was repudiating the romanticism of the 19th century, and that it was so wrapped up in sentimentality and emotional sort of stuff. And that's what this stuff is, with the colonial revival and the
ladder back chair and the baby.
all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
but Barbara, are you saying that you think these are modern?
Well, they're modern in one aspect, in that abstraction of taking out what you don't need. And, you know, in many ways. But you could do this in a way that is not revival, that is not sentimental. And, you know, don't forget, the whole point of the colonial revival was to say there was an authentic Americanism that immigrants did not share.
Right.
And so there's a political motive behind this too.
Yeah.
So if you take all this, and even the nosegay is kind of a colonial, that's a nosegay,
Yes.
colonial revival idea. So, you know, this is not modern to have a political idea. The idea of serving the king, which was why art existed for centuries, or serving the state, is really not modern. You do it for the sake of art, not for the sake of a narrative that either is for religion or the state or an
For
emotional
For
idea.
our audience, let's put this in a time frame.
Yeah.
Well, these are 1930s, and you know, looking back at the one that just
Amish. Same time as the Amish, same time as the TVA.
Yeah.
And I think it's very cool that this is coming right after the Tennessee Valley Man, because I was just saying, oh, look how, you know, in one sense, it's not it doesn't tick the box of not having a narrative, not being it's not sentimental, but it has a narrative, it has a meaning, a message.
A message.
And yet we still accept it as modern. I think ultimately we have to reject this and the spinning wheel lady as modern, because although they are visually using the technique of abstraction, it's so permeated with so much sentiment and nostalgia that it tips the balance out of being modern, I would argue.
Well said, Alden.
yeah.
Well, let's go see what's next. So we get
There we go.
There we go.
lead to no sentiment, no story. Now this is very hard for people who
Oops, how did this happen?
are. How did this happen? I don't know. But people who are not familiar with modern art, and this included my father. I was married to a painter once, and my father would say to him all the time, "What does it mean?" And he would, oh God, did they not get along? But anyway, the principle is it means nothing. Now, not modern. Here's a Bouguereau painting. You know there's a story there. It's sentimental. It's 2 girls, 1 orange. You can figure this out. But in 1863, Manet did this. This knocked people out. And the reason is, what the heck is going on there? Why is there one naked? What does this mean? He just put things together he thought would look good. And this was the first modern painting. A lot of people consider this the first modern painting because there's no story. Don't exert yourself trying to figure it out. No sentiment. I'm going to go back up here for a minute. So when you see something, a modern painting, you are not to ask the artist, what does it mean? Because he probably will glare at you. So the no sentiment thing becomes back to the colonial revival idea. You know, this woman in the long dress, this Southern belle. Southern belles are also promoting a political idea of the lost cause and the wonderful, the South before the war, and what a perfect place it was for everyone, including the happy slaves. You know, this is forget it. So Sunbonnet Sue is sentimental. I do not care for sentiment. This is my version of Sunbonnet Sue down there. And it worked quite well. We certainly attracted a lot of attention with that quilt in 1979.
Barbara, I want to clarify something. Can I go back for a second? You said that it has a political, what did you say?
A political meaning.
Yes.
But colonial lady, and the Southern belle, sometimes she's called, has political meaning in glorifying the Confederacy, the lost cause.
I understand. I just want to point out and ask you, you don't mean that they consciously were doing this?
Yes, they were conscious.
Sure they were.
Sure.
They were consciously.
Yes.
Well, maybe not every single quilt maker was choosing it, but they're choosing to portray this pretty little oldie-timey lady who comes with an awful lot of baggage.
She does.
Yeah.
And whether she's a colonial lady, an authentic American as opposed to an immigrant, or a Southern belle, when Southerners were so happy before the war between the states.
I understand what you're saying.
Politics in the image. Now, politics in the image sometimes is so subtle. People made these because they thought they were cute, because they were sentimental, and they love cuteness. It's hormonal, I think. I don't have those hormones. You could see down here. I have none of those hormones. I don't know what happened. So, Jules, are you happy with that?
Well, yeah. I mean, a woman in the North who was all Union and didn't really approve of the Confederacy might make this quilt, and it had no political import consciously into her. She just, as you said, thinks it's cute.
Oh, yeah, I think that's true. But still, there is an underlying meaning.
Well, that's our interpretation. And
Okay.
it's about intent or motivation, or I think we need to be careful a little bit. I agree with you. I mean, an analysis of it puts it in a social and historical context that suggests a political point of view.
And don't forget,
they weren't doing it. Some of them were not. Definitely not good.
oh no, most everybody wasn't doing it consciously. And it's like so much of culture, you buy it and you don't examine it until, Black Lives Matter. There's so much we don't examine until we're slapped.
What is
I love this comment. This is a great comment.
That is great.
I saved this picture because I like the spaghetti arms.
Well, that's the other thing, Barbara, is that people who don't know about that original, the demise of Sunbonnet Sue, give just a little tiny bit of context here so they know what's what.
Well, I belong to a quilt guild, and this is 1979, and me and my modern artist friends would sit through this every month. There was this woman who would show us sunbonnet quilts, and my friend Lori, I believe, turned her over on her side and said, "I wish she was dead." And I said, we could do that. So we did. We made a quilt with 20 blocks. It's in the MSU museum now. And 20 blocks in which we killed her dead. But it didn't work.
In 20 different ways?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
I gotta see that.
Yeah, but this one I did. And I thought it's amusing.
It is.
It is amusing.
Yes.
It caused a lot of furor there in her town.
Oh my gosh, it did. It did. Oh, people were furious.
One of them died next to the 3 Mile Island nuclear.
Oh yeah, it was contemporary too, you know. Of
Or
what
hit
the
by
death-
Sputnik, wasn't that? Or
Yes, hit by some kind of lab was falling out of the sky.
Skylab.
You know, we never stopped when we found a good thing. We've made 3 of these, 4 of these. Always contemporary. We talked about doing one recently, but we decided it was too much of a bummer. So,
Move
anyway.
on. Move on.
Move on. Do we have time for line for line's sake? And I can talk a little about line. I mean, line is part of drawing. Line is part of art. You use it to create a portrait, as Ang did here. Ang, that's how you pronounce it, Ang. But in modernism, people love line just for the sake of line. And Jules Pfeiffer is a great example because this is a perfect portrait of Gregory Hines. But also, even if you didn't know who Gregory Hines was, it's a beautiful drawing because the line grabs you. I'm a big fan of line. And Debby Cooney apparently is too. So Deb, what do you know about this one?
Well, I bought this log cabin barn raising variation at an estate auction that included many quilts by Alberta Herring Bucher, 1878 to 1959, and her mother, Catherine Miller Herring, 1842 to 1934, of Iron Springs, Adams County, Pennsylvania, just a few miles west of Gettysburg. The quilts were made on the family farm as a collaborative effort over a number of years. The 2 women obviously liked to make log cabin patterns, as 5 examples dating from the early 20th century were included in the sale. 4 were interesting but not unusual and were made of, typical cotton prints in varying shades. The women appear to have, this one stood out for the strong lines and the high contrast of its lighter and darker timbers. It is only 16 blocks, so each strip is large enough to stand out. And the quilt owes its brightness to the wool fabrics that hold the dyes a lot better than cottons.
Yes.
And these 2 women appear to have used scraps left over from garment making and perhaps recycled articles of clothing. Some of the fabrics are rather coarsely woven, maybe made from work shirts or coats. But not content with just the basic pattern, the quilt makers had to add a handsome 3-part border to put a little touch of elegance to what was probably to them just kind of ordinary scrap-like leftovers. The diagonal lines of the chevron quilting add some depth to the flat surface and the rectangular boxes. So, in spite of its utilitarian fabric, the quilt apparently was not used, as it remained in very good condition up to the time I bought it.
Well, that border is just another line, and it's perfect, Perfect. That's a fabulous, fabulous modern quilt, I think.
It really is.
Yeah. And it's red and green with a little purple.
Yeah.
You've got another one. Yeah, go on.
What I'm struggling to understand as a historian who does not quilt is surely it's got to be harder to do those irregular strips than to do regular strips. I mean, how do you make it all pieced together and lie flat when you've got these irregular shaped strips?
It doesn't necessarily lie flat.
Barbara photoshops Debbie's pictures so they're nice and smooth.
But it fits together.
Well, that's true. Yeah, you're a garment maker. If you do that, people look really bad.
Yeah.
I always wonder how these women created these spectacular quilts without a design wall and
I know.
Or
How
the
do you make-
space.
yeah.
or the space.
And look up here. See, Alden, look at this. Look at this mess.
Right?
Look how wonky that is. How did she get it to all piece together properly? It's just
Well, it's on a foundation.
okay.
So she starts with a square of cotton or something that's pretty stable, and then she adds layers. And so you've always got that underlying square
Fair enough.
piece of fabric.
Fair enough.
And I think that I think that they started doing these foundation fabric quilts because they had so many Delaines and barrages, which we've talked about in other contexts, so many flimsy fabrics left over in their scrap bags. And so they had to figure out some way to stabilize it.
Yeah.
But that's a beauty. Let's see. Debbie has two of the great lines. This one's
Oh, this is so awesome.
That's wonderful.
yeah. So what do you know?
This is
Well,
so modern.
I do have some history on this one. It was purchased at an estate auction maybe 25 miles east of Gettysburg. And it is a mashup of strings flowing every which way until interrupted by another segment of color.
Yeah.
It's an unfinished top. It's foundation pieced and made of dress weight wools, suiting fabrics, and cotton velvets, both sewing scraps and some used clothing, because I can see the seams.
Mm-hmm.
It is. It's not one of the traditional crazies or string patterns of the same era that you see in that area of Pennsylvania in the late 19th and early 20th century. This maker deliberately did an abstract design of contrasting colors and sizes. The top was sold in a lot with blankets and bedspreads in one of the boxes lined up behind the farmhouse for $20.
Oh.
The family's other quilts and tops were in patterns and colors typical of the time and the location, which is an area heavily populated by German immigrants. It is not
Give you
uncommon.
25 for it.
Yeah.
Let's start a bidding war.
But these are not considered all that valuable or marketable because of local cultural preferences. The residents of these areas generally prefer that their quilts and their other bedding be constructed carefully and according to a prescribed pattern in fashion at the time. Auction goers may be offered a blanket chest full of quilts made for everyday use and for nice, both, all saved for later generations. So quilts like this one from rural Pennsylvania resemble in many ways those made by African American and white quilt makers in the rural South, in the rural areas of the Deep South. Some of these differences relate to the history of these groups and how they used what they could buy, or what was available to them. Differences in style are only one part of the story of this bed cover.
I want to just say something to the I think it's probably Beverly or Jeffrey. It's a pet peeve of mine. No, a Moreau looks like this. It does not look like a Moreau. Moreau looks like this.
What's a Moreau?
Yeah, what's the date of this piece, Debbie?
Oh, probably 1900, 1910.
Wow.
Wow.
And in fact, back to that TVA quilt, a lot of people say it looks like a Matisse hand cut.
Oh, yeah.
And I checked that out, and she was way before.
Oh,
Matisse.
yes, of course. She didn't.
But hers really do look like.
Someone many years ago,
Cutouts.
many years ago, somebody did an art show in a museum called Provocative Parallels. It's provocative. There's no answer. But, I mean, we love this because the line. And now knowing that it's black velvet, that's why it's so bright.
Yeah.
You know, it really absorbs every speck of light. And I wonder if the pinks weren't something else one time and faded, but that's perfect, you know, having that real high pink in there.
It doesn't look it, actually. I've looked in the
that was her
and
tent.
it seems to be the same color all the way
I
through.
actually think the peach works really well.
Yes, yes.
It does.
Sometimes things are accidental and work great. Now, Alden, we're going to tell you, as quilters, I have no idea how she put this together.
Well,
boy.
that's, again, I want to, like the Quiltcon right now. I mean, he looks like Sherry Lynn Wood's improvisational quilts. You know, you just kind of make these curves, you let them go, and you see where they end up. Even the quilt that won this year, the grand prize winning quilt, when she was interviewed, she just said, I didn't know what it was going to look like. She was a wonderful kind of, she'd never entered the show before.
Wow.
She won with the first one, and she just loved her quilt. You know, she just let it flow. And
that's what's happened here.
And I think that's what's happening here. It's wonderful to think that over 100 years separate these.
This one
I think it is because of the fabrics. and our feel, our need to create and make something that wasn't there before. And,
Mhm.
you know, it's just fun.
Well, I love line. You know, I'm an artist, and I use line a lot because it attracts your eye. But look at that line there. It's a very useful trick as an artist to put a really dominant line in there. And this woman has done it. Now we have hundreds of pictures. I have hundreds of pictures of crazy quilts like this, string quilts, that are not worth showing here. This one just works.
Mhm.
Debbie, is this the whole quilt?
Yes,
I straightened it out.
Okay.
it is
I think
foundation piece, but of course it's a little bit wonky.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't hang well in her studio, but I straightened it out.
And
All right, well, I get to talk because I love the crazy quilts with their outline embroidery when it becomes the line. And you can't, these two are just two knockout examples of one of the billions of crazy quilts that people made in which line comes to dominate the whole thing.
Mhm.
So if anybody has anything to say.
Well, but again, the one on the right is abstraction because it
Yes.
does look as if it's a crazy quilt, and it is, I guess, but
Yes.
you dropped all of those different jewel tone colors and all the cute little embroideries and whatever that you get in crazy quilts, and
Yeah.
all that's left is the black and white.
And
And the
minimal, and
ties.
that's minimal color.
Glass.
Ties. Yeah.
And I think
And
that
the
red and white border is kind of a nice
Yeah.
thing too.
Yeah.
With more line.
I have a wonderful quilt like this, but instead of outlining each piece, which is what I assume is happening here, mine is big fields of color, solid color, with crazy embroidering in the crazy shapes. So it doesn't
Oh,
follow the
right.
seams. It just looks crazy, but it's not.
Right. Right.
Whoa.
Really
I
great.
like the look so much.
Yeah.
Well, I assume this is black pieces just cut in strange places, but you know, that's as much as I know about it. I just steal these offline, from online. And the one on the left with the star, perfection.
It's great.
So how are we doing on time, Tara? Is it time for a break? Or should we go on?
I think maybe a quick break. 5 minutes?
All
Okay.
right. All right.
All right.
All right.
I'm going to take my screen share off.
Say again, Barbara. I had you muted.
They can hear us, so we can't fight. Mute us all.
I think Merikay left the stream.
Apparently, we fought too much.
You read her off.
Yeah.
I'll give her a text and see if I can catch her.
Let's see where. Next, we're going to talk about color for the sake of color, and Julie's up again. And then Lynn. I need more water.
Hello?
Hello.
Okay.
I've been talking with the no sound, huh?
I know, I couldn't hear anything either.
All right. I was just saying that this might be a time to let people know that the 6 know-it-alls, which are the 6 of us with a lot of technical and technical input and historical input from Tara as well. The 6 of us get together every Monday, and 1 or 2 or 3 of us bring a quilt to the screen that's a new discovery or a quilt we have questions about, and then we bat it around, kind of like what we're doing here. And early this month, was it in February, gals? We decided to open it to the public, and it can be seen on YouTube. I wonder if somebody has a way of giving a link to that.
I can grab one and I can post it in the comments.
Great. We're planning to do another one. Those of you who liked it the first time or want to check it out, it's going to be March 28th. It's called 6 Quilts, 6 Know-It-Alls. It was a lot of fun, and we hope you'll join us.
And this would be a good time. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good time to point out that the study centers for AQSG are next weekend, and at least 3 of us are doing them. And at least in my case, I signed up for 8 others. So it's going to be a bonanza next weekend if anybody's really interested in American Quilts study group, and to hear all it's a wonderful group. And
Merikay, do you have to be a member of American Quilt Study Group to go to the study centers?
yeah, ask Tara. Yes.
Yes, for this session, we opened up seminar, I think, to some non-members, if I remember right. But these study centers at the end of February are for our members. And
a good time to join. Why not?
Yeah. How do you do that, Tara? How do you join?
great time to join. There's information in the membership section of our website. You could go
There's
there.
a link on the Quiltcon website to our membership.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. In our vendor booth, you'll find under the resources, I think it is, there are links to our various social media and membership information, or you can just click the website button at the bottom right of the booth itself. And we have seminar, hopefully in person this year. We weren't able to meet last fall for seminar, but we're looking forward to Virginia. I think, does somebody need to help me with the dates here? August 18th through 22nd, I believe.
Not sure. Can't help you.
I can go look. I'll be right back.
Yeah, so it would be a great time to join, so you can make it to seminar and meet these amazing women in person. They'll sign your books. First seminar I went to, I accosted Barbara in the lobby to make her sign my book before she got back on her plane. You don't remember that? Oh, you're muted, Barbara. Hold on.
Well, you can say what I said. No, you know, I love signing books, but
Barbara,
She said, hurry, my shuttle's about to be here. My shuttle
I
will be
think that's what
Okay.
I said, yeah.
Barbara, you did the best inscription in a book I've ever heard of when you wrote an inscription to Joe Cunningham in one of your books.
Mm-hmm.
I loved it. It said, to Joe Cunningham, without whose help I wrote this book.
I stole that from some other wittier person than me. But it is my favorite thing to write when you have a relationship with someone. Like I have a relationship with Joe Cunningham. Yes. No help at all.
Oh,
Okay, so AQSG seminar is in Virginia, Harrisonburg, Virginia, August 18th through 22nd.
got it.
And
Thank
while we're talking about Virginia,
Oh, goodness.
the Virginia Quilt Museum, I'm speaking there about 1930s quilts on Quilt Day, National Quilt Day, which is
March
March,
15th.
the third Saturday of March, I think.
Oh, okay.
No,
I think that's the 20th.
20th. Mhm.
Third Saturday.
Yeah.
Well, that's coming right up, isn't it? It is March.
For those of you on Facebook, Barbara has created a page called what? Quilt and Textile
Quilt and Textile History Programs.
Quilt and Textile History Programs. And you can see what the six of us are doing in the coming times. And it will also be a place where you can get more information about the Six Quilt, Six Know-It-All, episode 2.
Yes.
And also about the various lectures that each of us can offer to your quilt group or whatever group you're part of. If you're looking for a speaker, there's some titles of things that each of us can offer and our contact info. So just scroll through the page.
And we all do Zoom lectures, right?
We all do Zoom.
Hey, Teddy.
Hi, Teddy.
I know, we miss each other's voices so much.
We do.
Well, that's why we started this whole thing. We started doing Zoom cocktail hours every 2 weeks, and then we liked it so much we went to every week, and then we started doing quilt show and tell, and then we started saying maybe some other people would like to listen in on our conversation, and apparently they do.
Well, when we go back to real life, whatever real life might be, I think we'll never give up the Zoom because I can't see Alden except for once a year.
Right. We must do that.
We'll continue to Zoom those cocktail parties.
Yes, now is the perfect time to join American Quilt Study Group.
How long have you been a member, Barbara?
I was a founding member, Mary Kay.
I know.
I remember Sally. This was 1970s. I don't remember when we started. But Sally Garoot and Joyce Gross said, we're going to start this kind of academic group. I said, oh, yeah, right. And they said, no, really, we mean it, academic. And I said, well, I could do that. I could join. And there were 6 of us, I think. And so I'm the oldest living one left. But I was a child at the time. They were 20 years older than me.
I think it's important to say, though, Barbara, that while it has an academic base to it, anybody can join. Anybody can write a paper. That's one of the things that I love about it is how inclusive and Sally in particular had been burned badly in the academic world as a woman. And she very much wanted an organization where anybody with any level of education who wanted to learn or write a paper, and even if they didn't know how, they'd have mentors. That's the kind of thing we do. It's open to everybody. Beginners, academics, everybody. Come join us. It's really great.
And even if you just want to be a bystander, you don't have to write a paper.
Oh, for sure. I've never written a paper.
No, but that's a very good point about this group that, sometimes there are, professional or academic organizations about a particular topic, and it can be very intimidating if you feel as if you don't have, the academic credentials. And it's such a great group because, I have the title curator in my name, but I have been studying all of this so much less time than all of the rest of you and many, many people who were there at AQSG. And there's so much to be learned from the people who have been just fascinated by and doing their own research on quilts for decades. And everybody there, is at all kinds of different levels of knowledge, and everybody's willing to share and discuss and be friendly and collegial. So it's a very, very collegial and welcoming group. And I've really felt that.
Even though you haven't been deep into quilts for a long time, you are a costume expert.
Oh, well, I know about costume and textiles. I know about women's history, social history. I hadn't been I hadn't been in charge of the quilt collection at the DAR until about 2003, I think.
Oh, really?
And so I had a general knowledge of quilts. If you put a quilt in front of me, I could say, oh, it's a framed medallion, and I see that roller printed cotton dates to about 1820. I wasn't a complete ignoramus, but I hadn't focused on quilts. I hadn't spent a lot of time thinking about them. I hadn't been to AQSG. So, I was coming into that professional group as a relative newbie in that sense. But
and bringing your kind of knowledge to those of us who don't have it. That's the
Right.
idea.
Thank you.
Is
So
that-
we can come from different directions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I
it's
learned
over
in
40 years old. I mean, it's really amazing that a grassroots organization run totally outside a academic situation has lived this long and has had this much impact. And we just want it to keep going.
Yeah.
And
And it will.
I look at Lynne Bassett and the number of years that she worked on the journal, the Uncoverings journal. I mean, that's a thankless job, and and the new one has just come out with a wonderful editor,
Joanna.
Yeah, and it's an excellent journal. We didn't get to see them presented this year, but the papers are there, and they will be presented in August at the Harrison, along with some more. It's just a great place. You'll never see so many fabulous quilts in one place. Thanks to people like Julie Silber bringing her.
We should, for those people who've never heard of American Quilt Study Group, we should explain that there's a seminar, papers are presented, exhibitions, our physical exhibitions are there, a vendor's room with, as Merikay says,
Best vendors.
literally the most great quilts I've ever seen in my life in one place, many years.
Yes.
That I would never have otherwise had the opportunity to be that close up to. That in a museum,
Exactly.
you cannot get that close to really study it and investigate it.
And
But
have
with
the
this-
have the opportunity to buy it if you can.
And that.
Yes.
Julie sold me this one.
But then networking too. I mean, the
Absolutely.
friends that you make. I mean, I don't know my neighbors as well as I know my quilt friends. I mean,
Absolutely.
they're all over the world, and sharing the knowledge and sparking inspiration with, it's just a great group. And
I don't know my brother as well as I know you.
I know.
Well, I'm glad you like us better than you like your brother.
I didn't say that.
I hope he's not listening in.
I love him. I just don't know him very well.
I've been a member of AQSG since at least the late 1980s.
Yeah.
And if you had told me at that time that I would be someday, Zooming with these women I idolize, I would have thought I had died and gone to heaven.
Welcome to heaven. Welcome to
I met
heaven.
Lynn, she was 12.
Yeah.
About
I was 30. She was 12.
Shall we resume?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, instead of just nostalgia.
Oh,
Yes, sure.
You
This
know,
is
nostalgia
really a
is not
topic
modern.
we've never,
Not the
it's a
least
topic
bit.
we've never, wrote. I think this is very cool to look at antique quilts in a modern.
All right, I'm gonna.
I'm learning a lot. I'm learning a lot.
Oh, good. Thank
Really?
goodness. That's
And I just want to say one more thing. Tara has a talk. Tara, come back on and tell us about it. Because it's part of the no, it's not part of the AQSG thing, but the AQSG is also doing talks that are available, right?
Yes, well, we have several virtual offerings because just with everybody the past year, we've had to move really as quickly as we could, which wasn't as quickly as some organizations, but we've really moved a lot of our offerings online, and we have little short snippets called Quilt Snacks on our YouTube channel, which is, if you're watching this here, you have found our YouTube channel. And we do some quilt shows there as well. And Julie, I don't know if you're talking maybe about my graphic quilts of the 20th century.
I am, yeah.
Talk. We did some short versions of our talks that we donated to a quilt show, the Rio Grande Valley Quilters. And I don't believe those are still available, but I do offer that talk as a Zoom presentation to guilds. So you can visit my website at quiltdistrict.com if you're interested in that.
Great.
Well, I am going to share my entire screen here. Share. All right. can you see my entire screen here? And then we are going to go to, I'm going to have to go way down and go through everything. Don't throw up here when I go fast. Goodness. Break. We did that. 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 Oh, we've been through so much.
Okay.
All right. Julie Silber.
Oh,
Now, you didn't know nothing about this. I just did this morning. But I thought, you know, in the past, color was to describe something. This is a wonderful quilt that Julie owns with roses and some kind of a bug. Not much of an entomologist. And in this quilt, this woman has used her silks beautifully to describe the nature. And so that's very old-fashioned, and it works very well. I'm going to hide this now that I know I can do that. But then Julie also has this quilt with the same colors. And this one is not modern. It's sentimental, if nothing else. But this one is very modern. And I thought we could talk about how modernism means just the joy of color, just using color for color's sake. And here's one that Julie said, I don't know much about this quilt, but I know what I like. So tell us about this quilt on the left.
I love that quilt. I don't remember where I bought it, but I remember that whoever sold it to me didn't think it was very interesting, and I thought it was fantastic, just fantastic. I actually gave it to a friend of mine who lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and needed some quilts for his wall, and this is just his cup of tea, so I gave it to him. It looks wonderful up, as you might imagine. It's wools. I wish I had a detail of it, because that kind of stripy thing,
The line.
yeah, is very gauzy. I think I'm pretty sure it's a part of the blue fabric, the dark blue fabric, but it's very it's got a different weave in the center of that fabric. I don't know much about it, except I know what I like.
I know you do.
I like Barbara Brackman.
Today. Well, anyway, you know, it's what's the complementary colors? Orange and blue are complementary. And then it's got gray in there. Gray is the neutral. And it's got lime. And it's just perfect. And then I found this Joseph Albers. Now, Joseph Albers did one thing over and over and over again, which is his homage to a square, in which he stacked up squares in paint and prints. And he's got the same kind of burnt orange and the gray green here. And this quilt is just the perfect, oops, if I click on that, it's always a mistake. The perfect modern quilt, using color for just the sake of color.
And once again, it's like that first one we saw of the lightning with the yellow and purple.
Mhm.
It's the same as red and green. It's one primary blue, and then the complementary secondary color that's the combination of the other two primaries. So orange and blue, purple and yellow, red and green, they always work.
They always do. And they teach you tricks in art school. Sitting there going, what should I be doing with this painting or this quilt? Find the complement to the color that you're working with and throw that in. It cannot hurt. And it usually makes the quilt. So I think both Joseph Albers and this anonymous quilt maker knew that. Does anybody else have anything to say about this?
I wish it were mine.
Yeah. I'm just thinking that white stripe looks like what they would do sometimes to machine stitch two lengths of cloth together. I'm wondering
Yes.
if
Yes.
And by the
Only
way,
the customers would know.
I don't know how old it is, but I want to just be sure to point out that it is not newly made. It's probably the first part of the 20th century,
Yeah.
close to 19th.
Those wolves.
well, I think it's just brilliant how that was used.
Yeah.
In the
Occasionally, when you buy flat folds, you get that where they're zigzag together.
Right.
We just throw it out, but maybe we shouldn't be.
yeah.
I certainly wouldn't be surprised if I saw it in Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
I have forgotten at the moment what the back is, but I remember it didn't give me a great clue. as to the age or region.
Well, with solids, it's so hard to date.
Mhm.
Prints are so much more trendy, you can trace them. Let's go to your next one. This is Lynne's, and Lynne loves these pieced calamencos. Okay, why don't you tell us what calamanco is?
Well, calamanco is an umbrella term as it's come to be used these days for these glazed worsted fabrics, but in the 18th century and 19th century, they would have recognized it specifically as a satin weave glazed worsted. So these glazed worsteds can come in a variety of weave structures, but people tend to call them either calamanco or,
Lynne's.
it hurts me to say this, they'll call it linsey woolsey, which is entirely wrong. Entirely wrong.
Wrong.
Saying it. Stop saying it. Yeah.
And wouldn't that, linsey woolsey is wrong, but it means linen and wool, right?
Or cotton and wool.
Yeah, exactly. It started out as a linen warp wool weft. It's a very rough fabric used for work clothing, used a lot in slave clothing. In the 19th century, when cotton replaced linen, it was a cotton warp and a wool weft, and was sometimes just called simply linsey. And so that's, where you get your southern linsey quilts, which have nothing to do with these elegant glossy worsted quilts.
Mm-hmm.
And I just have always loved these quilts for their color, the big blocks of color, and how graphic they are. And they have received very little attention in publications. And I'm not really sure why that is. I think of them as kind of a transition from the 18th century whole cloth into the 19th century pieced quilts. But it's clear that in many cases they are using bits and pieces of fabric that they had around, reusing recycling fabrics.
One of the things I look at these and see half square triangles, which a lot of the modern quilt people use half square triangles.
Oh yeah.
And large scale pieces.
Right.
I think this would fit right in the mid. It's very, very, as the modern aesthetic associated with the Modern Quilt Guild right now.
I want to ask about quilting. I'm obviously not very familiar with modern quilts. Are most of modern quilts machine quilted?
I think so, yes.
Yeah.
But there's a category of hand quilting, and I think they seem to really revere it. But there's an aspect of modern quilting that, do it fast. We have busy lives. You listen to them speak, and they're young. They have children. They have very little time to work on quilts. And now I'm not talking about the professional modern quilt people, but that's how people enter the field. And and in fact, they are making things with large pieces and using half square triangles are really a wonderful way to improvise and to create your own, and looks pretty modern. You see a lot of it.
We're not talking about scale right now, but scale is a principle of modernism.
We're not. That's right.
And which is fine. But just imagine these on a colonial bed. And I read Laurel Thatcher Ulrich's Good Wives, I think it's called. And when she talks about how strict Puritanism was and how you could never go out of the strictures. And yet these women, this is what their bed, which was in the middle of the living room, looked like.
Right, they're in the parlor.
Yeah. Amazing. I mean, look at that star on the middle of a bed. And here's this Puritan Calvinist.
I think these ones likely date into the early 19th century, when you also get the concept of fancy, which is a just this really dynamic mixing of pattern and color. So I think, these are on the leading edge of that idea. These two are interesting because they're a little different from many that I see, that the quilting is very simple.
Yes.
A lot of them have that elaborate sort of stylized floral quilting that you see in the whole cloth, but they use that within the blocks of the pieced wools too. So you can get either kind of quilting, and also just those. The dates on these ones, I think they must date to, we'll say, the first quarter of the 19th century.
And look at that quilting on the one on the left. Look at the quilting around the box, the center box.
Yeah.
How-
Yeah, love
I
it.
think that's a stroke.
No, I'm talking about outside, Barbara. Out the first part
Oh,
of
this one? Yeah, the
Yeah.
curve.
Yeah,
This is fascinating. This kind
which
of thing.
softens the stark geometry in some ways.
Oh yeah, look at that.
That's fantastic.
I mean, I picked these two. Lynn didn't get to pick them. We were on bumps. But yeah.
One
thought these were
more thing that people might be interested in is that these are typically quilted with worsted thread too.
Wow.
So it's
And
not
of course, filled with wool, of course.
right. I mean, they really should be called woolsy.
Woolsy.
Yeah, this is from a woman whose nickname is Lindsay.
Well, my middle initial is Z. I couldn't help myself.
Yeah, I know. But Merikay's quite an expert on actual Lindsay quilts from Tennessee. You want to say anything, Merikay?
Not really. These are a totally different animal.
Yes,
I love that I'm hearing New England people saying that, because when I ran into Lindsay in the South, it didn't connect. It didn't look like the same thing I hear Lindsay in the North. And when I started writing about it, people were always correcting me, and I thought, well, I'm just going with what they call it down here. And basically it should be called a cottonsy woolsy.
Cottonsy woolsy. Cottonsy Lindsay.
Okay, Lynn, next cat.
Let me just say one thing about this. At the same time that these were being made in New England, already from the Quakers in Pennsylvania and New Jersey and all the way down the coast, they are making chintz quilts.
Yeah.
They're very large, elaborate, cover the whole bed.
Printed fabric
that are so different from these, just completely different.
And I think that's our next topic, if I'm not wrong.
And one more thing, Lynn, you were saying that these have not been published very much. I'm just thinking.
Not in my opinion. I got to, if I can, I'll give a little promo to the IQSC. I wrote about them in the IQSC's latest book, American Quilts in the Industrial Age. So there's a bit in there, but typically there's not much time given to them in quilt survey books or anything like that.
I'm just remembering that one of the first books, America's Quilts and Coverlets, Safford and Bishop, red and white cover, the first sections of that book go into bed rugs and some of these. And I know it's early and they may not even have the information correctly, but it is a good way to see some.
Safford and Bishop is fabulous for pictures, but I think, we need to look at more recent scholarship.
Yeah.
And they are a limited time period. They're what, 1770 to 1840 maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
So, and then the regionalism sort of dropped off as it became more national style. Well, our next principle, which may be our last one, is unmodulated or flat color. And we're back to Bouguereau. Everybody loved to hate Bouguereau. And that beautiful little picture of a gypsy girl there. What he has done is depict that girl beautifully by shading. And the shading in her shawl, the shading in her fingers. I found the Toulouse-Lautrec picture of the same pose, a little bit slouchier because you know what this woman did for a living. But you can see the difference here. Bouguereau is using color in a completely different way than Toulouse-Lautrec, who is using flat color to define the woman's legs, her hands, and this scarf she's got on. So let's look at flat color and talk about, here we have another Calamanco or another polished wool quilt. This one's from the American Museum of Folk Art. This is just something I found online. This is not modern because it's the kind of chintz quilt Debbie was just talking about. It's the one with all the pattern. But this solid color is modern, and that's why, that's why we're selling a lot of solid color fabric at Moda and not a lot of reproduction fabric right now, because solid is modern. So this is me to talk. I just said what I had to say, but isn't that a gorgeous one there? Again,
The fancy
bed. It's got the kind of quilting Lynne was talking about too, with the more organic kind of shapes. So Mary Kay, you talk
I
about.
was hoping we'd get to this one.
Yes, Mary Kay. What do you tell us about this? This is so fantastic.
Well, this quilt was made by first time quilter. First time she made any kind of quilt, and this is her picture with her quilt, and you'll see that the ribbon is attached on the right. She was from Winnemucca, Nevada, Edith Morrow Matthews. She entered the Sears Quilt Contest in 1933, and 24,000 quilts were entered all over the country. Only 30 reached the final round to be judged at the Chicago World's Fair in downtown Chicago. And Sears had offered a prize. In fact, they did not want sentimental quilts. They wanted original quilts. They wanted full-size bed quilts. These are all things I looked at because we've just been talking about this modernism. And I looked at this quilt and I thought, this really fits. And I think the only judges across the country, I mean, there were 10 regional areas with their own set of judges. The only judges that chose their top 3 representative best quilts to be judged in Chicago were from the Los Angeles region. Is right. Yeah, I think so. And hers won the first prize, and this is it. And I mean, we talk about flat color. She's got it. We talk about the primary colors. She too took a piece of brown paper wrapping, and I mean these still exist. The pattern still exists from her work, and she just drew these shapes out, cut them, and pieced them together. As I remember, they're all pieced together, not appliqued. And she, like a lot of us who start out making a star, or you end up with this hole in the center. And she did this brilliant thing. She covered it with white. And you could, in the black and white, when I blew it up again for this, you could see how she quilted this. And it's all by hand. And it's very similar to what modern people do now. So I think we can relate to her a lot. And I just think it's wonderful. It has already been duplicated and won a prize at Paducah, believe it or not. I was shocked when I saw it and went to Paducah, and here was a quilt. I thought, what in the world? And somebody took the photo from our book, Patchwork Souvenirs, that Barbara and I wrote in 1993, I think, and she created her own. I mean, everybody, I guess, there's a desire on the part of people to try to do what somebody else did.
I hope she gave Edith credit in her label.
I can't remember that she did, but in fact, there's a little secret here.
Oh, a secret.
A secret. When this photo was published in the book, it was printed backwards.
Oh.
And so the lines go to the left.
Oh,
and that's how that woman made her quilt.
Oh, and that's
so I knew that it was I knew what was wrong. And so, because we have this picture of her. And so I flipped it for this particular PowerPoint so that we could see it as it should have been. So anyway.
Well, I have a friend in my guild who's been spending her COVID year trying to copy this.
Really?
And
Wow.
when she gets it done, she writes occasionally and goes, kind of stuck. I don't look at me for help, kid. I have no idea. But I think it's important to mention, Mary Kay, that when they set this contest up in the height of modernism, when it was very popular, they said, we will give an extra $2,000, which was a ton of money. I think it was $1,200 maybe, for a quilt that reflects modernism, essentially.
Yeah.
And they never gave it.
Oh,
Because they had set out the rules for the contest and they did not hire judges who agreed with them. So the judges tended, they did some modernism, but the judges tended to not go for this kind of thing. So Edith was lucky that she happened to be in LA, where everybody's modern. But it's a pretty spectacular quilt. And we also have to mention that Edith was influenced by modernism. We know the Amish in 1880 were not influenced by modernism, but Edith Matthews was definitely influenced by modernism.
She's the one. Oh yeah, I love you guys.
It really, it keeps reminding me, even though it's somewhat more regular than this, it reminds me of futurism because there's so much pow and movement to these colors. It's a little more restrained than that because it's got the kind of consistent swirl to it, and futurism kind of goes all over the place, but that's what it keeps saying to me.
It's
the buildings at the fair they had a colorist, Joseph Urban, who was an artist, and he painted, or the idea was to have all the buildings large flat areas with these primary colors. And it became known, the World's Fair site became known as the Rainbow City, as opposed to the White City of the 1893 World's Fair.
Columbian Exposition.
Columbian Exposition, exactly. And it's interesting. Winnemucca, I went there a couple of years ago when we were in Nevada, and it is on the railroad, but it is out in the middle of nowhere. It's open, dry country with nothing. But there's definitely a town there. And I saw her house, but how she came up with this idea, maybe she just read it and thought, this to me represents modernism, and she did it, and I think it's a wonderful piece.
It is.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to go to the next one. Now, this is also something you put up there. And you said, is this modern? What do you think?
Well, the rest of you could talk about it, but this is a string quilt, and I
think it has, some aspects. Nothing fits into the perfect box, especially those yellow squares that jump out because yellow is the highest color. But in modernism, you weren't supposed to really use prints. But if you look at the furniture that people were making, all the furniture artists, they were allowed to use texture. You could use a kind of a grid or a woven in modern furniture. So all your office furniture sort of reflects that. And this, to me, actually becomes, the prints come to the point where they're not really prints in texture. It's very interesting. I think that's why you brought it up. It's interesting.
What I was thinking about this quilt is, could it have worked if those solid blocks were any color other than yellow?
I don't think we'd even have noticed it.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Yellow is great because it is the highest color. And, quilters don't buy it. When I try to sell a range of fabric, I always get the sales results, and yellow is like down at the bottom. People don't see, how they can use it. And
Really?
Yeah, it surprises me because it's an easy fix, which she has done here. And I'm sure it was accidental, but it's kind of a great quilt.
Oh, it's fantastic. I think that's a great quilt.
but it turns into texture here.
Mhm.
So these
So
are
I
feedback.
thought Alden might talk a little bit about red and green, because the
Oh.
DAR has many, many red and green quilts.
I keep mentioning, I didn't even know you were going to ask me
I
to
know
do
this
this,
is neat
but
of me.
I've been paving the way all throughout this time because I keep mentioning the red and green quilts and the other complementary colors. Well, you know, I don't know what to say. None of these is particularly modern, except that it is, to some extent, it's abstracting various floral and fruit things. Are those things on the upper left meant to be pomegranates or buds of some kind? It's hard to say. But yeah, at the DAR, we have a really good collection of Maryland quilts, also Virginia quilts. I think it's partly because when people look to donate, they often want to donate to a place that's local, even though we're a national organization and we do get things offered by people from further away. But I think often if they're further away, they still look for a place that's closer when they are giving away a quilt, because often there's a sentimental attachment to it. But in any case, the result is that we have an amazing collection of Maryland and Virginia quilts. And you can see most of them online at our Ion Elegance online exhibition. We put them on exhibit. I think we had 36 quilts in that exhibit at any given time. And then we switched a couple of them out so that there were a total of 38 or 40 quilts throughout the course of it. But it's ionelegance.dar.org. And if you don't remember, just go to dar.org and go to the museum and start looking around, or just Google Ion Elegance.
Fantastic exhibition.
Yeah, I saw it too.
Very well. And fantastic website.
Thank you. Yeah, the website is really well done. I think that's the one where the website designer won an award for the design of it. You can zoom on every quilt to almost full size, so you can really get up close on the quilting and the fabrics.
That's where I got these pictures.
Thank you, Tara. So there you go. And you know, Maryland was the place where the album just went on steroids and went to a pinnacle of design. And Debbie is the one who should be talking about it.
Yep.
Debbie's one of the major experts on Baltimore albums. I'm only here to plug the DAR collection, but they sure took that yellow, that red and green, those red and green dyes. You know, they were getting better at having stable green dyes. I'll put in a plug for my other quilt exhibit that has a good website, which is a piece of her mind.dar.org, where I talked about the effect of technology and other cultural things and politics on quilts, and women being engaged with the world around them in their quilt designs. And I talked about the red and green being made possible. Not only is it just so visually appealing, but the improvements in dyes around the middle of the century were making really good, reliable reds, and often more, not always more reliable, one-step greens. And so suddenly you had these really good green and red fabrics that you could make these amazing, these amazing quilts out of. So Debbie, do you want to say any more?
Here's another one, Deb.
Thank you.
Oh, wow.
Oh, I love that one.
Or not.
And that's fun because those birds in the middle were taken from a popular coverlet
Oh, I
design.
forgot about that.
And this woman is from northwestern Pennsylvania. And there
Those
were
are
some
birds.
Pennsylvania and Ohio coverlet designers who were making coverlets with these sort of bird of paradise-y birds, and they look exactly like these birds, and she's just taken them from the coverlet design and put them in the quilts. And that's not particularly modern, but it makes it interesting. So
Alden, both exhibits had a catalog, is that right?
both exhibits had a catalog, and both still are available. If you go to the DAR museum shop online, you can still order them. Thank you. Yes.
And they're well done.
Oh no, I lie. A Piece of Her Mind did not have a catalog. It's only online. But Ion Elegance has a really beautiful catalog, and I can say that because I'm not the designer. Jeannie Crone is. And it's beautifully designed and has great some really great essays, including by Debby Cooney on fabrics, and Virginia Viss wrote an essay on album quilts, which Debbie could also have written. I was spoiled for choice on having some people write some of these essays for the catalog, and then each quilt has an essay. But I've talked too much. Move on.
Great. No, it's a great.
Well, I'm going to say the reason I put these up here, it's surprising, Alden, is because we've been talking about flat color, and I think it's important to see where the modernists were looking. They were very interested in folk arts. Folk arts, of course, had been why is there a difference between folk art and fine art? But it had been ignored. And modernists, especially in Europe, were very interested in sort of promoting their own their own country. And they used the folk art of their country to sort of emphasize why it was so great. So that's what that's even why you have a swastika for the Nazis. That cross happens to be a very important piece of German folk art, and Hitler knew what he was doing. But all these other people also were echoing the folk arts of their country, and so you see many, many modern artists as folk art collectors. And I'm sure they had quilts, and they had things like Bavarian painted chests. That's 1794 on that chest, and there's something about Germany, something about those Germanic countries, the Germanic principalities. They loved red and green. And I went to Germany once, just taking pictures of red and green. The traffic signs are red and green. It's interesting that is so Germanic. And so you see something like this. And then up at the top left, I have one of those toll painted, I don't know what those are called. Those are the kind of things that my grandma collected. And I went, uh-oh. But still, it's flat color and it's the same imagery. You can see the feathers. You see, and so these modern artists were collecting folk art, and I think the flat color appealed to the flat color, and also sort of the connotations of Germany as the Über alles, but also every country had some kind of nationalism going in the early 20th century that became offensive and also kind of, it's caused the wars, but it was still a very good way to get those folk arts out into the get some value given to them.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to sort of.
Well, and quilts are sort of one of our folk arts. And so I think that, our colonial revival and our revival of quilts in the early 20th century fits right into that, right?
Yes.
Is that where you're going with that?
Yes, that's
even when we're exploring modern themes in them.
And if you look at many modern artists, they collect quilts. One of my favorite stories is Man Ray, who's one of my favorite modern artists, the surrealist. We haven't even gotten into surrealism. Had a quilt that he drug around from France to back to the United States and back that his mother had made from suiting samples. Now I can describe it, and you know what I mean. It's wool rectangles with a little embroidery around each one.
A brick wall.
Mm-hmm.
And he hung it wherever his studio was, and people were knocked out by it. How minimal, the line, the minimal color. So I'm sure if we went through many, many of these modern artists in the early 20th century, we'd find that they had significant folk art collections. That goes back to even Picasso, who was collecting the folk arts of Africa. Mm-hmm. So folk art is an important principle here, but I think that's where we get a lot of the ideas on flat color.
Yeah.
Maybe our time is up.
I think it
You can
is.
see the policeman. That's Tara. There's the monkeys.
I saw that Tara put a note, or no, Sharon Waddell said that registration for the study centers closes tomorrow. So if you want to check that out, thank you, Tara. Check those out on the American Quilt Study Group page.
All right. And I'm going to
Barbara's
stop.
talking, Julie's talking, Mary Kay's talking, Lynn's talking, right? Is that correct?
I'm
Not
not.
Julie.
Yes, I thought I was talking
Right.
now.
I'm not doing it this time.
Oh, you're not. Okay. Debbie,
I'm
are you
doing
doing
one.
one?
I'm doing
No,
one.
next time.
Okay.
Good, Sharon.
Next time. Okay.
Thank you, Sharon, for organizing this.
Yes.
Tara,
Yes.
We're done.
Good work.
All right. Do you have any wrapping up thoughts, or is everyone done?
I'm talked out.
Talked out.
I need a nap.
Talked out.
Come visit the Six Know-It-Alls again on March 28th.
Yes,
That's right.
we'll be
Have
revived.
more fun.
We'll have to think of some topics. So we got a month.
Yeah, you got some time. You'll
Tara,
find something.
Do you have a link to the last one, Tara? The one that's on YouTube?
Oh, I will pop it in the comments this will stay on YouTube, so it will be in the comments. Then I wasn't able to get it in time to pop it in live.
Yeah.
But I think if you just Google Six Know-It-Alls on YouTube, you'll probably find it.
And if you guys want to stay on for a minute, I will find that.
Okay.
I
think it is. I think it's Mary Fonz, the Mary Fonz channel.
Yeah.
The YouTube channel.
That's
We
right.
thank Mary
Mary
Fonz
very
Tara.
kindly sponsored us, hosted us.
Yeah,
And
she did
cut
that.
us so our stuttering became less. So thank you, Tara and Mary, for making us look as good as we possibly.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Very much.
Let's
Yeah.
see here.
And the audience can, to remind the audience, American Quilt Study Group, become a member if you want to do more things like this. You love old quilts and
Yep.
I'm almost there. I'm
Yeah.
almost there. Well, she's got a lot of stuff on her page.
That's Mary Fonz for you.
I know.
She's got another lecture tomorrow at Quiltcon called Healing. That ought to be good. And I think she did one today on political quilts.
Oh.
And she did one on the Whitney show. No, she did anyway, she's done, I think, 5 lectures at this Quiltcon. And I
Are
hope
any of
they're
those
all
teachers-
placed.
Busy girl.
are they available?
I
On her
hope
web-
so. I bet they will be on her website, but they were
Her
excellent.
YouTube channel.
If
Yeah.
anybody's still on Quiltcon, they could watch them until
Oh,
next
yeah.
Wednesday. They're
Yeah.
shown anytime after they're, yeah.
I don't see your Six Know-It-Alls up here on her.
Yeah, I had trouble too finding it that way. I only got it from a link that Alden had posted
Okay.
to it.
Really? That's weird.
Well, I think,
Okay.
I'm sorry. It was in one of your emails to me.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
I think what might have happened was she made it private for anyone who has the link, but it doesn't show up in her particular feed. So we'll get that link and pop it in here.
All right.
Great.
You know, there's one thing I think was kind of interesting about today is that we didn't consult our genealogist. Alden is our genealogist.
But you know, I can't call myself our genealogist. All of
I
you guys
know.
do genealogy too.
But we
you're
don't have
fast.
the DAR
You're
behind us.
fast.
We don't have that DAR behind us.
I go off and I open a separate screen and I do it in live time. That's my
I know.
own.
She can find a person in 35 seconds and they're
Oh,
seated there.
let me say what I was going to say.
Sorry.
go.
I was going to say that these are anonymous quilts. Almost all of them that we've shown today
True.
are anonymous, except Debbie did great giving
Yeah.
the background of it. And it's amazing what you could do with an anonymous quilt by comparing, contrasting, looking at them from different angles. And I think that's what we've been doing on our know-it-alls, is taking our talents and our perspectives and mixing it up. It's material culture studies is what it's called. And it's today was a really good example, I thought, of what can be done even with anonymous quilts.
Yeah.
Yes. And
It was more of an aesthetic focus this time. Yeah.
it's so helpful to have 2 costume historians who know the fabrics and can tell you the dates from what
Although
they
again, today that was less relevant.
Yeah.
Because we had mostly solids.
right.
Yeah.
But they used to make
But check back with us in March and we'll do more of our parlor tricks.
Yeah.
28.
All right, ladies. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye,
See you guys.
Quiltcon.
See you guys Monday.
Okay, bye.
Right. Great.
Okay.